A great deal of nervous fatigue can be dealt with in this way. Our doings aren't so important as we naturally suppose. Our successes and failures don't, after all, matter very much. Even great sorrows can be survived. Troubles which seem as if they must put an end to happiness for life fade with the lapse of time, until it becomes almost impossible to remember their poignancy. But over and above these self-centered considerations is the fact that one's ego is no very large part of the world. The man who can center his thoughts and hopes upon something transcending self can find a certain peace in the ordinary troubles of life which is impossible to the pure egoist. What might be called hygiene of the nerves has been too little studied. Industrial psychology, it's true, has made elaborate investigations into fatigue, and has proved by careful statistics that if you go on doing something for a sufficiently long time, you will ultimately get rather tired, a result which might have been guessed without so much parade of science. The study of fatigue by psychologists is mainly concerned with muscular fatigue, although there are also a certain number of studies of fatigue in school children. None of these, however, touch upon the important problem. The important kind of fatigue is always emotional in modern life. Purely intellectual fatigue, like purely muscular fatigue, produces its own remedy, in sleep. Any person who has a great deal of intellectual work devoid of emotion to do, say for example elaborate computations, will sleep off at the end of each day the fatigue that day has brought. The harm that's attributed to overwork is hardly ever due to that cause, but to some kind of worry or anxiety. The trouble with emotional fatigue is that it interferes with rest. The more tired a man becomes, the more impossible he finds it to stop. One of the symptoms of approaching nervous breakdown is the belief that one's work is terribly important, and that to take a holiday would bring all kinds of disaster. If I were a medical man, I should prescribe a holiday to any patient who considered his work important. The nervous breakdown which appears to be produced by the work is in fact, in every case that I've known of personally, produced by some emotional trouble from which the patient attempts to escape by means of his work. He's loath to give up his work, because if he does so, he'll no longer have anything to distract him from the thoughts of his misfortune, whatever it may be. There's been a great deal of study by psychologists of the operation of the unconscious upon the conscious, but much less of the operation of the conscious upon the unconscious. Yet the latter is of vast importance in the subject of mental hygiene, and must be understood if rational convictions are ever to operate in the realm of the unconscious. This applies in particular in the matter of worry. It's easy enough to tell oneself that such and such a misfortune wouldn't be so very terrible if it happened. But so long as this remains merely a conscious conviction, it will not operate in the watches of the night, or prevent the occurrence of nightmares. My own belief is that a conscious thought can be planted into the unconscious, if a sufficient amount of vigor and intensity is put into it. Most of the unconscious consists of what were once highly emotional, conscious thoughts, which have now become buried. It's possible to do this process of burying deliberately, and in this way the unconscious can be led to do a lot of useful work. I've found, for example, that if I have to write upon some rather difficult topic, the best plan is to think about it with very great intensity, the greatest intensity of which I'm capable, for a few hours or days. And at the end of that time give orders, so to speak, that the work is to proceed underground. After some months I return consciously to the topic and find that the work has been done. Before I discovered this technique, I used to spend the intervening months worrying because I was making no progress. I arrived at the solution none the sooner for this worry, and the intervening months were wasted, whereas now I can devote them to other pursuits. A process in many ways analogous can be adopted with regard to anxieties. When some misfortune threatens, consider seriously and deliberately what's the very worst that could possibly happen. Having looked this possible misfortune in the face, give yourself sound reasons for thinking that after all it wouldn't so much be a very terrible disaster. Such reasons always exist, since at the worst nothing that happens to oneself has any cosmic importance. When you've looked for some time steadily at the worst possibility and have said to yourself with real conviction, well, after all, that wouldn't matter so very much, you'll find that your worry diminishes to a quite extraordinary extent. It may be necessary to repeat the process a few times, but in the end, if you've shirked nothing in facing the worst possible issue, you'll find that your worry disappears altogether and is replaced by a kind of exhilaration. This is part of a more general technique for the avoidance of fear. Worry is a form of fear, and all forms of fear produce fatigue. A man who's learnt not to feel fear will find the fatigue of daily life enormously diminished. Now, fear, in its most harmful form, arises where there's some danger which we're unwilling to face. At odd moments, horrible thoughts dart into our minds. What they are depends upon the person, but almost everybody has some kind of lurking fear. With one man it's cancer, with another financial ruin, with a third the discovery of some disgraceful secret. A fourth is tormented by jealous suspicions. A fifth is haunted at night by the thought that perhaps the tales of hell-fire told him when he was young may be true. Probably all these people employ the wrong technique for dealing with their fear. Whenever it comes into their mind, they try to think of something else. They distract their thoughts with amusement or work or whatnot. Now, every kind of fear grows worse by not being looked at. The effort of turning away one's thoughts is a tribute to the horribleness of the spectre from which one is averting one's gaze. The proper course with every kind of fear is to think about it rationally and calmly, but with great concentration until it's become completely familiar. In the end, familiarity will blunt its terrors. The whole subject will become boring, and our thoughts will turn away from it, not as formerly by an effort of will, but through mere lack of interest in the topic. When you find yourself inclined to brood on anything, no matter what, the best plan always is to think about it even more than you naturally would, until at last its morbid fascination is worn off.